Hey everybody, welcome back to the Align Your Health podcast. I'm alone today, so I have no leash on me. I don't have anybody kicking me under the table, and I'm allowed to say whatever I want to say. So today's episode is going to be fun because we're going to talk about something that very few people know about, but is really just, it's been an interest and a passion of mine, and it fuels a lot of what shapes who I am in the wellness and healthcare space. So I'm ready for it. Let's just dive right in. All right, so I actually was sent a presentation from a friend of mine who's a chiropractor, and his daughter did a presentation for her high school class. And he sent it to me saying, hey, you'd be proud of this. She talked about Rockefeller medicine, and you got to listen to this. And I watched it, and this young lady just articulated the history of modern day medicine in the United States, and really now the standard around the world in such a beautiful way. And I thought, you know what? We've talked about this before, but it's always worth talking about again. And I think so many of my patients don't know that. So let's just take a step back, 30,000 foot view, and look at our healthcare system today. And I will say this frequently, and if this lands and you hear this and you think, man, I never thought about it like that, then this is a great opportunity to learn where the foundation of our healthcare system came from. But frequently I'll ask patients, who wants more drugs and more surgery? Raise your hand if you want more drugs and more surgery. And you can guess how many hands go up. It's zero ever. Every now and then you'll get somebody like, well, I guess so I had to, or aren't we blessed to be, in the time or era, day and age, and maybe even the location where we have the best healthcare available ever. We have the most scientific advancements, and we've studied medication now for so long. And so every now and then somebody will say, I think we're blessed to have blah, blah, blah. And then I run through, the numbers, and I say, listen, if you're going to have a heart attack, chances are you're probably going to have a better chance of survival of that heart attack now more than ever in history. That's true. If you break a bone really bad, like one of the really bad ones where your arm or leg doesn't look straight, or there's a bone maybe even protruding, they're going to be able to do surgery, and that bone will probably grow back straighter and better than any other time in history. And if it's, protruding, surgical interventions to help you heal faster. But outside of life-threatening and injury, I would agree that those are modern medical advancements. They're amazing. But when it comes down to day to day, the very things that we do every single day, and we call healthcare, taking pharmaceuticals for, let's just use cholesterol, for example. Cholesterol is a very, very important part of your health. That it is true that people with low cholesterol actually die younger than people with higher cholesterol. That's statistically true. Now, does high cholesterol lead to certain things with heart disease? Potentially, but it's not just cholesterol. So this idea of lowering cholesterol and that we're going to try to control cholesterol leads to other problems, because your brain's made out of cholesterol. Your nervous system is made out of cholesterol. Your hormones are made out of cholesterol. Because your nervous system regulates your immune system, it's actually called your neuroimmune system. Your immune system relies on cholesterol. So just lowering cholesterol actually, as a practice, has led to and created so many other health problems. And that's just cholesterol. Lowering blood pressure, doing these things, they're not always inherently good. And unfortunately, we don't go big picture and look at the person and the holistic health of the person. Instead, what we tend to do is look at the condition and actually the symptoms of the condition. So how did we get there? How did we get to the point where we stopped taking care of the person? when it comes to diet, when it comes to exercise, when did doctors stop talking about diet and exercise? When did doctors stop using plant-based medicine? When did doctors stop talking about things like oregano or thyme, things that now are essential oils and only a soccer mom trying to make some money on the side talks about it? When did these things begin? And that's really the root of what I want to go after. And it all comes back to a gentleman that most of you don't associate with healthcare. And his name is John D. Rockefeller. He was the oil tycoon who established such a monopoly over oil that the federal government had to step in and break up Standard Oil and stop the monopolization. Literally, things like the game of Monopoly and the idea that it's not fair for someone who establishes themselves and is able to make a lot of money, as a capitalist, that they can then take that money and leverage it to control so much that they end up just ruining all the competition and damaging the free market, and they end up being the sole owner and sometimes hide it under multiple names. Well, that's what John D. Rockefeller was known for. He did it in oil. He was friends with people who did it in other areas, even with energy. And you go back between Edison and Tesla and Westinghouse, the same tactics were used in those. But John D. Rockefeller, when Standard Oil was broken up, he needed his next thing, and he wanted to do it more covertly, and he wanted to do it smarter, and he still wanted to monopolize. He just didn't want to be found out for the monopolization. Right at the turn of the century, he had some scientists who discovered that petroleum could be used for making most medications and drugs, and that these chemicals, the petroleum that was being used to make these drugs, was a medium by which it would help it to get into the body. And he goes, I have lots of petroleum. So he started funding research. And what's crazy is he actually got to the point where he noticed if we could get people using this to treat illness is something that's a human condition and it's never going away, that we're not designed to last forever, and that unfortunately we do run into injuries, symptoms, conditions, and eventually we expire. And he realized he had a target market of everyone, and he had a situation where everyone was going to need something at some point. But unfortunately, people had been using nutrition, diet, herbs, vitamins, minerals, plants to really work on restoring their health. It's even biblical that God says he gives us the leaves of the trees for the healing of the nations. And I find it kind of ironic that John Rockefeller was actually supposedly a devout believer, and he yet missed that whole part of it, that God gave us the leaves of the trees for the healing of the nations. So he started this whole process of establishing pharmaceutical medicine, petroleum-based, but he realized I have to get it to be viewed above or better than what the current thing is, which was, all those things I just listed. So what he did was he actually went to some people he was friends with in the government, Congress. He actually had another friend by the name of Carnegie, and the two of them worked together and established something called the Flexner Report. So the Flexner Report was essentially something that they gave to the government, and it was an evaluation of our current medical practices. And the one thing that pharmaceuticals have always promised, and they're not shy about this, is that pharmaceutical drugs do decrease symptoms. It's chemistry, and you can manipulate your physiology through chemicals. But, You can't patent a plant because it already exists in nature. You can't patent a vitamin because it already exists in nature. You can't patent food because it's from God. You can't patent exercise, but what you could patent was if you created a new substance, a new compound, something that doesn't reflect anything in nature, you distorted it in some way, man-made, and you made something new, you owned it. You're the creator of it. You can patent that. And when you can patent something, if you can sell enough people on the idea that your product's better, nobody else can make it. So it is in term monopolization. That's what he sought to do, but instead of just proving that he came up with a better product, which he didn't, he decided to destroy the ideology of the current method. He took the Flexner Report, and they basically self-ordained, created a grading system of what schools were teaching proper medicine and what schools were teaching these old, antiquated, supposedly less effective processes. And they were using herbs and things like that, you can say, hey, this is what my grandmother used to use, but the new science is this. And they evaluated these schools, and essentially what happened was you would get a grade, whether it was A, B, C, D, or 1 through 10. But the ones who scored the highest got the best grades, and the ones who scored the lowest got the worst grades. And the ones who scored the highest, the overall assessment was they were being evaluated on whether they used the new scientific approaches, pharmaceutical medicine. Were they using the best of the best? And the schools that would do that, the Harvards and the other medical schools, they got great grades. And they were definitely leveraged to use it because they were told if they used it that they would get funding. So they started using it. They got a good grade. The other schools that held, to no, we believe that plants and herbs and exercise and food is the way, they were considered to be non-conforming, they were antiquated, that they weren't with the times. And so what happened was they got poor grades. Well, those grades then influenced this thing called the Flexner Report, which became how we established what schools got grants and what schools didn't. These grants back then were in the tune of $500,000, to $1 million, which in today's money would be millions and millions of dollars. And so schools that were using pharmaceutical, petroleum-based medicine got millions of dollars, and the schools that weren't using it got nothing. Well, if we know anything about competition and, even in marketing, you can have a process and it can be moderately effective. When we market or advertise to patients, we know for every dollar we spend, we tend to attract so many potential people interested. Well, if you want more people interested, you can throw more money into the machine. And so what they did in this aspect was they just threw the most money at the schools that were willing to use John D. Rockefeller's petroleum-based medicine. And those schools ended up thriving on their money, not because of how effective the actual thing was, but because of how much they were being funded. And then the public perception shifted towards these institutions because they were building beautiful campuses and their doctors were graduating with esteem. And what happened was the whole modern medical system actually started based on financiers who were selling us a lesser product, because chemically what actually has to happen if you're going to make something, if you're going to take something effective. So let's use some examples. For instance, there's a vitamin that is very important for fetal development and very important for fertility, and it's called folate. It's a B vitamin, and folate is crucial for how we actually develop during pregnancy and even being able to have a child in those first few very vulnerable moments where cells are multiplying. Folate is a big part of that process. There is a synthetic version of that called folic acid. So what they did was they took the folate molecule and they synthetically changed it And whether you take a chemical that has all chemicals in the body are either right or left shaped. And sometimes what they'll do is change that shape. It's called chirality, and they'll use a chemical process to do it. But once they changed it, it is a new chemical, and that new chemical can then be patented. So now we don't have folate in most of our products. If you look at your bread, if you look at certain foods, you're going to see something that never existed in nature, and it's called folic acid. And folic acid has very similar properties to folate, but your body doesn't process it in the same way. So it actually becomes more toxic because it creates more stress. The body has to assimilate it and break it down differently. So it's kind of jamming up the pathways or systems, and it's not as efficient, so the body actually takes on the stress. Folate, when you take it, your body breaks it down and knows how to do it because it's made by God and it's absorbed very easily, it's broken down very easily. Well, now most of your supplements, if you look at them and they have B vitamins in them, you'll see folic acid. Folic acid's very toxic. It's very toxic, especially to the very pathway that folate helps. Folate is great for pregnancy, it's great for development, it's great for neurological function when babies are developing and they start off as essentially just a nervous system. As their nervous system expands, they start growing other cells and they start creating limbs and all this. Well, folic acid actually interferes with that process and it delays, and I know this isn't a popular word, but it retards the process and damages the process. And so you actually see more birth-related issues. You see more birth defects. You see that fetal development doesn't happen the same way. And this is just one example. Another example of man creating a chemical is in the plant, wintergreen. There's a chemical. It's called methylsalicylate. And methylsalicylate, when we eat wintergreen or when we distill the oil and use wintergreen topically, the mint on wintergreen has this chemical methylsalicylate, and methylsalicylate has impacts on lowering blood pressure. Drinking wintergreen tea can actually help to affect your blood pressure. It can affect inflammation. It can affect just essentially several processes of healing in the body. Well, we took that chemical and we isolated it, which means we removed it from all of the chemicals it's normally involved with that all work together synergistically. We isolated methylsalicylate, and we created a new version of it called salicylic acid. You guys know the word salicylic acid if you know the word aspirin. Aspirin is mostly salicylic acid. It is a man-made copy, a fake version of methylsalicylate. Now, is it identical? Absolutely not. That's the whole point, because now it can be patented. Is it more potent for certain outcomes or symptoms? Sure, that was the point of changing it, was to isolate certain properties of it. But when you isolate certain properties and make them stronger, you make some of the other properties stronger too, so it becomes much more toxic. Your body doesn't know how to process it. You've taken it away from the other chemicals that are involved in wintergreen to help your body recognize, utilize, detoxify, all these other things, and you've just isolated this one compound and changed it so that your body no longer processes it as easily. So where you could use wintergreen, now we use salicylic acid, and there's this dependency that comes upon it. So that's another version. When we talk about this stuff, we say if God made it, it's probably good. And there's probably things that man, when he takes something and manipulates it, when man makes something, we don't have the infinite knowledge that God had when he put methylsalicylate in a leaf or in a stem. We are working with limited knowledge, and so we think we're doing well. The Bible talks about there's a way that seems right unto a man, but the end of it is death. And that's exactly what medicine is. It's a way. We've isolated something. We think it's right because it's more effective at certain things. But the end of it is, unfortunately, you can run the numbers on this, but people actually die from salicylic acid use. Another version of this is there's a chemical in a plant that comes, I believe, out of Haiti. It's called vetiver. And vetiver has a very unique aroma to it. And even when you smell it, you can feel something in your physiology change. Kind of the same way when you're walking outside and you're amongst, trees and you're in nature, you just feel better. You're actually breathing in chemical compounds. In trees, a lot of them are terpene molecules. And terpenes have a profound effect on our nervous system. So part of the reason you feel good when you're hiking isn't just the movement, and it's not just being in nature, but you're literally breathing in the off-gassing of what the trees and plants and roots and stems and weeds are producing. And a lot of those have very positive effects on you. The same way that poison ivy could have a negative effect on you, it's a protective mechanism in that plant. There are also life-giving mechanisms where plants are good for us. This is where the leaves of the trees were meant for the healing of the nations. Vetiver has a chemical in it. It's called methylphenidate. And methylphenidate, we isolated that compound, we changed it chemically, and we created a version of methylphenidate that is used today, and it's used widely in drugs that affect our nervous system. It's used with ADD and ADHD. You guys know some of the names of those drugs, and there's one in particular that's mostly methylphenidate. Again, not a natural version of it, but a man-made version of it. That drug in particular, which I'm not going to name directly, but it's one of the major medications for hyperactivity disorders, it actually comes with a black box warning, and it says that you may, if you're on this drug, have a desire to harm yourself or others, because we can't control exactly how it affects every single person's brain. Vetiver doesn't have that same effect because, again, when it's distilled, all of the major molecules that are in that plant are still in that essential oil, vetiver, and that essential oil now contains all the things that help support that methylphenidate. So these are just some examples of how plant-based medicine, nutrition, vitamins, herbs, minerals, these were all crucial for health. And when we established the Flexner Report and said, no, that's old, that's antiquated, what it almost did is it almost killed that entire practice. All the holistic schools started shutting down. We went from having midwives delivering babies and actually having unbelievable success rates, and we were like, you're going to have a baby at home, you're not going to have emergency support. And then we went to the hospital system. Well, I don't know if you guys know this, but in the hospital system, we have the largest rate of infant mortality in the industrialized world. That there are countries that have running water and food, and they wash their hands, and they do all these, practices that we're industrialized. We're not living in third world countries. And out of all of those countries, roughly 40 something of them, the United States has the worst infant mortality rates in the world, meaning more babies die that shouldn't die. Now, if our practices were so great, why is that happening? Because we've taken a natural process that sometimes babies didn't make it, and we've made it a medical process, and statistically speaking, in the United States, we're the worst at that emergency process, and we actually lose more children than any other country, and a lot of those other countries actually practice more of the natural methods. There's a way that seems right unto man, but the end of it is death. And that's just when it comes to infant mortality. When it comes to medications and drugs, we have more heart disease than any other country in the world. We have more diabetes than most countries. We have more cancer than most countries. In fact, right now, our cancer rates, our diabetes rates, our heart disease rates, they're almost the highest they've ever been, and they keep getting worse. And yet we have more medicine, and we take more medicine. We are roughly 6% of the world's population and currently take about 60% of the world's medication in sales. Now, some of that goes to farm animals and your veterinarians, but most of that is used on humans, and so human beings actually consume more drugs in the United States, and we do more surgical intervention. We have more medical care than any other country, and we have literally the worst healthcare outcomes. You don't have to trust me on this one. You can look up the World Health Organization's list of countries ranked by health, and you'll see that we rank dead last very frequently. And I'm talking 40 countries, we rank the worst. We're really good at one thing is we can keep you alive and we can keep you pretty miserable and on medication longer than almost anybody, but you're not thriving. It's not vitality. You're not healthy. I think if most people you were to say, do you want to live a healthy life, enjoy the whole time, medication free and with very little medical intervention? Or do you want to live a slightly longer life, but be on drugs your entire life, have side effects, end up in the hospital for the effects of those medications and side effects, and potentially lose 15 or 20 years of your health, maybe end up in a wheelchair, potentially even lose your mental faculties, dementia, early onset, Alzheimer's, all of this is at the hands of these petroleum-based medications. And most healthcare workers that are in the field, your nurses and your doctors, they have no idea of the history of where modern day medicine started, that it started with John D. Rockefeller, an oil tycoon. They don't know that their institutions are, forever immortalized and thought of as being the premier institutions simply because they keep getting funded money. And this still happens today, that our federal government actually throws money at pharmaceutical interventions, pharmaceutical care. A lot of the chairs of pharmaceutical companies end up going and working in the government. People from the government who establish relationships end up going and working for pharmaceutical companies. And so what we have is hands shaking hands, and they're all agreeing we're going to keep them under this illusion that modern day medicine is the thing. And the reality is the jig is up and it's over. But I think it's important to know what John Rockefeller did to establish that. He actually bought a chemical company called AG Farben. AG Farben, I believe now a subsidiary of AG Farben, historically then now is considered Bayer. Bayer actually bought a chemical company called Monsanto. Monsanto produces the world's nastiest pesticide. That pesticide is actually illegal all over Europe, so they make it. A German company makes it, but they sell it over here in the United States. You guys know the history of AG Farben. You know the current companies that are now pharmaceutical companies. That's where they got their start. And AG Farben was actually known for one major chemical. It was called mustine. And it was actually bought from a German company that German company made all of the mustard gas that was used during World War II in gas chambers. So their major product was a chemotherapeutic agent that killed people and destroyed their health so fast that people died from this gas. And AG Farben was a chemical company. That chemical company was bought by John Rockefeller, and that's the company that he used to start the modern day pharmaceutical, petroleum-based chemical drugs. So this history is wild. And again, I don't think your doctors and your nurses know that when they go to an institution and they're learning pharmaceutical-based medicine and they're being told what your blood pressure should be or shouldn't be, and then if it's high or low, don't worry, we have the solution. It's in this petroleum-based drug that we created. If your blood sugar is high or low, don't worry, we have a solution. It's in this injection that you can take that happens to come from similar companies. And it's all based in the roots of this old way of John Rockefeller trying to monopolize the system. And I think most people, when you survey them, and we have, when you survey people and you ask them, do you think we're doing a good job in healthcare? Most people say no, whether it's affordability, whether it's access, whether it's actually the effectiveness. The vast majority of the score, on a scale of 1 to 10, the score comes back as being a score of about 4.5 to 6, meaning people think we're doing maybe okay in some aspects, but when you ask them, is there room for improvement or does our medical system need change, the score typically goes up to a 9 or a 10, meaning everyone thinks there needs to be a change in the healthcare system. When you ask people, do we need to look for safer and healthier interventions and try to move away from things like antibiotics and move away from things like pharmaceutical interventions? The same thing is most people say, yeah, that's the direction we need to head. We've gone this way so far, and I always tell people if you're heading to a road and there's a fork and you turn right when you should have turned left, You can go right and you can keep driving. You can drive faster. If I'm trying to go to Florida and I start going north, I'm not going to get to Florida by going north. I'm going to go down that road and get further and further away from my destination. I have to go back and then head down the other road. So one of the things we always encourage our patients is know some of the history and then know that we've been lied to. We've been lied to about the effectiveness of the old ways, the things that God commanded us about. If you read the Bible, there's lots of information on nutrition. There's actually lots of information on farming. We're supposed to give our land rest every 7 years. We're supposed to rotate our crops. We're supposed to grow different crops in the same spot so that we're not continuing to grow the same crop. And what this does is it produces plants, trees, things that actually we can use for the health of our body. We're supposed to only eat what we need and not more to sustain life and to sustain growth and to sustain maybe our activity levels, but not to sustain body fat, not to sustain elevated levels of, hormones like insulin. That when we walk away from it and we say like, oh, you think you can fix everything with diet and exercise? Oh, you think you can fix everything with herbs and plants? Oh, you're one of those hippie tree huggers who uses essential oils. We're actually shutting the door on God's intention for our lives, and we're believing that man has the answer. Again, there's a way that seems right unto a man, but the end of it is death. And we have more disease, more cancer, more diabetes. Now, modern day medicine would lead you to believe like we have scientific advancements. Don't get me wrong, we do. We have robots that can literally go inside your body and perform surgeries through very, very small incisions. We use laser beams to, make incisions and create scar tissue within the heart so that our heart fires differently. And there are some pretty remarkable things, but we don't think that the whole system and the basis of the system produces health. We actually think that in some cases it can extend life. In some cases it can help people survive that wouldn't have survived, but that doesn't mean they're healthier. And right now we're at a crucial time, especially in our country, where we have a sick population. We have an overweight population. We have a diabetic population. We have severe amounts of heart disease and cancer, and we really need to get back to health. Drugs don't create health. They treat symptoms of conditions, and they manipulate physiology, and it always comes with a cost. Plants and food and exercise and moderation are a healthy lifestyle. That is a healthy lifestyle. Now, it doesn't mean you have to be over here and never take advantage of over here. What it means is you live over here, and if there is an emergency, you can handpick what doctors you trust and what things you want to utilize over here. But if you live over here, you're living in the sick care model, and then every now and then you're like, oh, I like lavender because it helps soothe an irritation on my skin. Or you live over here and you're on 5 or 6 medications, and you're like, I add minerals to my water because I'm low in potassium and zinc, and it helps me to, feel a little bit better. There's a trend happening right now, and there's a shift. We're waking up. And as our patients wake up, I just want to encourage you guys to get back to the root of where the source of this information is coming from. Is it coming from John Rockefeller, who started the modern day medical revolution? Or is it coming from God, who created the things in nature, created your body to move, created your digestive system, created the plants and vegetables and herbs and roots and proteins and meats and things that you're to put in it? This is where we want to stay. We want to stay in our lane over here. When you're really over here, you require so little of this over here. As a chiropractor, I always go back to this thing. This is 2 vertebrae, and this is your spinal cord. And your brain is what controls everything in your body, but it has to send information through your spinal cord. Your spinal cord is the conduit. I don't like the fact that we separate the brain, spinal cord, and nerves anatomically. If we were to look at a dog, you don't go, hey, look at that head. Oh, look at that head's walking around on legs. Oh, look, it's got a tail-looking thing hanging off the end. No, it's a dog. The whole thing's a dog. It's not parcel and part. And your brain and spinal cord and nerves are one continuous thing. Your spinal cord is the tail or the trunk of your brain. It's your brain trunk. And then your nerves are the roots of that trunk. And the whole system is important. So chiropractors, we don't adjust bones to make cracking noises. We don't adjust the segments to get them moving a little bit better. What we're doing is we have a simple, effective way of moving vertebra to release tension, stress, and damage on this brain, spinal cord, nerve system so that it can fire and function effectively. And what we find is that when the spinal bones misalign or they start getting rigid and stuck and they're not moving as well, then what happens is tension and stress begin to develop on the spinal cord and nerves, and those nerves actually don't fire as well. And the action potential of that nerve, that's the electrical signal through that nerve, actually gets diminished to the point where, like, if you have a bad enough problem in your neck, part of the reason they even do neck surgery is because you go in, you'll do a test, like a nerve conduction velocity test, and they can detect whether that nerve is actually not firing, which means it's dying. And that's how long we wait in medicine. We have to measure that that nerve is now degenerative before we go, oh, wow, up here there's a problem. We're going to do a surgery and try to get pressure off that. As a chiropractor, we go, everyone's walking around with stress on their spine. Our lives are abnormally stressful. We sit too long. We don't exercise enough. And then there's just life. Car accidents, you played football, and your spine has been under duress, and not getting adjusted and not getting those vertebrae moving is akin to walking around, eating food, having a snack here or there, maybe a sugary drink or something, and then never brushing your teeth. It's hard enough to keep your teeth your whole life. If you do brush them, if you do floss, if you do go see a dentist, it's still hard to keep your teeth healthy. So imagine walking through life and you're sitting and compressing discs, and you're got in a car accident once or twice, and you played football or a sport, gymnastics, where you're just using your spine all the time, and the stress that accumulates on your nervous system. And then that stress starts to interfere with how well that nervous system is functioning. So we believe that everyone should be under regular chiropractic care, and that those adjustments actually change the way that your nervous system functions and changes how you heal. So I wanted to give you guys a little history lesson today. That's the story of John D. Rockefeller, A.G. Farben, and the petroleum-based medical system that we have today. Chances are, if you share that with a friend, they don't know that history. Chances are your doctor or your nurse don't even know the history of the profession that they started in and how it was only developed in the very, very, very early 1900s. Till next time, this is the Align Your Health Podcast.